Hey guys, welcome to You the Boss podcast, episode 38. And today we're going to be speaking with Alexa Chavarria. Alexa is a passionate, outgoing, get things done kind of gal. She is currently a senior account executive at 5WPR and a contributing writer for Jersey Bites. Her work has been published in the Beacon newspaper, the Pioneer Times, and Tap into Jersey City, Hoboken, and Paterson. Additionally, she has edited several published works, including the bilingual children's book Soapbox Kids. She's worked with clients across the board from travel, entertainment, arts, fashion, consumer, higher education, private wealth, and NGOs. Her areas of expertise encompass media relations, social media management, content writing, influencer partnerships, launches, event planning, campaign building, and much more. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Hi, Alexa. Welcome to You the Boss podcast.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. So, as you know already, we like to kind of dive right in. So, give us a little bit about your background and kind of what you do.
Yeah. So right now I am a publicist. I work for a PR firm in New York City. I'm the senior account executive there, working on the travel and lifestyle team, so a lot of fun accounts.
Mm,
And I'm also a freelance writer. I write for Jersey Bites, so I cover all new restaurants in New Jersey. It's really fun. I get to go out and try new
awesome.
places, meet chefs, meet business owners. It's really, really interesting.
Wow. Okay. So, I have to ask, did you go to school for this, or was this just something that you landed on and you've been running with it?
Yeah, so I went to William Paterson University. I got my bachelor's in public relations, major in public relations, minor in journalism. So I dipped my toes on both industries, and I've been lucky enough to land a job in both because I kind of love both, and it's been something really great to be able to continue both of those paths.
Okay, so how did you wind up in wanting to do journalism and being a publicist? Like, was it something you were exposed to in high school, or you just rolled over one day and were like, I really like this, let's pursue it?
I think so. It's funny because I always ask myself this. I'm like, where did I land here? Like, how did this come about? Because I've never met a publicist. It's not like none of my family members were publicists or writers.
Hmm.
Um, it's something that kind of just happened. I'll give credit to one of my counselors. When I was a freshman in college, I went to school for business because I knew I wanted to do something along those lines. But I suck at math, so I was like, "This is not for me." I was like, "I can't do this." And then my counselor was like, "How about communications? You ever thought of that?" And then I was like, "Oh." I started looking into it, and it's such a like a very broad industry, and the more I got into it, that's where I like brought myself down to like public relations and journalism because I felt like they would really complement each other, and they were the two industries that I thought had a lot of potential for me at least.
Okay, so you would say that having that experience with your counselor was just they did what I think they should do, which was kind of counsel you, and you made the ultimate decision, right? But they kind of
Yeah,
were like, well, you could go left and you could go right, whichever one you want.
exactly. Yeah, I got lucky because like I've had some counselors where they're like they don't really advise you on anything, but this one he actually did give me some insights, and I was able to like look into it. But it's also funny because I realized all the shows I watched, like I was a big Sex and the City fan, and I'm like, oh wait,
Mm.
low key, like I ended up being like a Samantha and a Carrie, and then or like I would watch like Disney shows and always be like someone writing for like a school newspaper, and like so in a way it was like in my brain. I just didn't know that's what I wanted to do. So it kind
Right.
of
It was
worked
in your
out.
subconscious kind of thing.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah,
So it's kind of safe to say that you love what you do for the most part. Every job has its ups and downs, right? But it's safe to say you kind of love what you do.
yeah. I absolutely love what I do. I think it's I try to advocate for it just because a lot of people don't think about this career path. A lot of people go into communications and end up doing something else. Like I have a lot of colleagues who studied communications and public relations, and then they ended up in like HR, for example, which is something completely different. And I think that in this industry, it's just something like you could really have a very interesting and dynamic career, and it's something that not a lot of people think of. So I always try to advocate because it
Right.
is really cool.
Okay. So I know that you mentioned you're based out of New York City for like um being a publicist. So is that remote or do you have to commute?
It's a hybrid. So thanks to the
Oh,
COVID
okay.
era, I don't have to go to the
Hmm.
office every day. It's kind of hybrid, but as a publicist, we always have a bunch of events. So it really depends. Like there's some weeks I'm there once a week, and then there's some weeks that I'm there like 4 times a week. So it really varies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm sure that you can't necessarily give too much detail, but what's something that you're working on right now with either one, if you want to mention both? What's something that you're working on that you're like excited about or that maybe you're working really hard on and it's something you're excited to kind of see come to fruition?
Yeah. Um, hmm. I work on so many random things, and they're all exciting in their own way. But something that I recently worked on that was mind blowing for me was announcing that Gordon Ramsay Hell's Kitchen was going to be filmed at one of my clients' locations. And
Oh,
I'm a big Gordon Ramsay fan. So when I had the opportunity to work on that announcement, like just be in the realm of his world, I was like, what? Like, this is so crazy. It was so cool. I was able to work a lot with his team to just like make the announcement of the actual filming, and then also get like influencers to go for the filming shoots and things like that. And the premiere is gonna come out soon, so just like seeing all that develop is just has been really interesting. And working with someone at his caliber is like insane to me. So that's something that I've been really excited about the past couple of months.
it's like one of the things that you're like, yeah, this is what I do kind of thing. Like, that's awesome. So I'm gonna ask a question, and I know that some people might know and they might not know. So this is more kind of like for the listeners. So as a publicist, I know that you said you minored in journalism, right? So as a publicist, are you kind of like you work with how many clients would you say you have right now? Let me ask that first.
Yeah, so at the agency I'm working at right now, it's one of like the bigger agencies in New York City. So we have clients from like 12 to 6 sometimes. It really depends because there's some like project clients, there's some long-term clients.
Okay.
Being a publicist, it's definitely overwhelming, and it's something that you're like always on, which is not for everyone. But yeah, on an ongoing basis, I would say like between 11 to like 8 clients.
Okay. And what would you say is something that you found out or that you learned like once you were in your role, once you were living this life, what would you say was something that you learned that you didn't necessarily know as a publicist? Like maybe an example is like you didn't realize that you would be dealing with so many people or that you would be dealing with certain situations. Like, what would you say would be one of those things?
Um, that's a good question. I feel like I've been lucky enough where like I started my career like before I even graduated.
Hmm.
And so I kind of got hints from the start of like what to
Mm.
expect in this industry. I think something that I didn't realize was the culture of like different types of agencies and different types of companies that do PR. I think that's what's, you know, it's something that you kind of have to get it, like really understand when you're in there versus something.
So you
It,
learn like hands-on.
exactly. Yeah. It's
Okay.
every company has its own culture. And I think that's just corporate America, you know, like it
Hmm.
really depends who you're working for, where you're working for. Like that's really what changes, not so much the work you do. Because at the end of the day, as a publicist, essentially what we're doing is just getting publicity for our clients, getting them media opportunities, getting them speaking opportunities, hosting events, working with influencers. Like at the end of the day, those are the pillars of being a publicist. But it really depends where you're working, like how that's
Mm.
executed. That's the difference, I think.
Okay. See, I didn't know that. I know just enough, I guess you could say. Um, so you hear like a publicist, and I'm like, oh, okay, she has three phones. She runs around with three phones. She deals with like a few major clients and then like a few coming up, and then she's all over the place. And she's just running back and forth like a kind of like a ping pong machine where you're just like running back and forth. So, it's interesting to hear that it can kind of be like that, but at the same time, you're in a space of like, depending on what agency you're with, is kind of the culture of it, which makes a lot of sense, like you said, with corporate America. Um,
Yeah, and
so
also the industry too. Like there's like I started working in like nonprofit PR. That was it was more like impactful work. We were working a lot of doing
mm,
community engagement. Right now I'm working in travel and lifestyle, so it's more, I guess it's more like self-serving for the clients. Like they just want to have publicity. It's not like you're announcing, a food drive. It's like, no, Gordon Ramsay's going to be at
mm,
Foxwoods, for example. Like it's two completely different worlds. So, yeah.
right, yeah. So that does make sense. So what would you say was a recent challenge in and kind of like in what you do for work? Um, Maybe if it was like a situation, work related, or like something that was impacting a situation for work, what would you say would be a recent challenge that you had and kind of how you overcame it?
I think as far as challenges, like this is something that in any industry you're always going to go through and face. I think one overarching challenge that I've been dealing with in my field is just office politics. That's just something you have
Hmm.
to get good at. Like it is
Yeah,
what
if
it
you're
is.
going to be
No
in
matter where
an
you're at,
office
like
setting, yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's like the office politics is it's annoying sometimes, but it's just something that you have to navigate through. Um, but I think like an immediate challenge I would say is just the media landscape. As a publicist, like I'm constantly working with journalists and reporters, and it's just interesting to see how the media has changed recently. And I think it's something that's been happening in the past few years. I've been lucky enough where like I started PR 2019, so like pre-pandemic,
Hmm.
and I've seen it evolve in the past couple of years, and it's just not what it was back then, and it's not what it was like early 2000s, and it's definitely not what it was in the 90s, right? Like it's just like media is completely different. Like to land a media opportunity, it really has to be a substantial story, like something really significant versus back in the day,
Mm.
like they would run any type of stories like, oh, it really, it's just interesting to see how media is not as tangible anymore and social media is. So
Mm.
something that like we try to explain to a lot of clients is like you are going to gain more value from like an influencer partnership versus an article on Forbes, for example. And it's something that you can definitely see, and you can record like, hey, you got this many views it converted into this many like sales or something, or subscriptions, for example, versus like how many people are really going to read this article. You know what I mean? Like it's just it's
Mm-hmm.
very different. So that's something that has been a challenge because you know you're trying to please your client, but at the same time, it's like the media is not, they're not going to run just any random story, and if they do, like it's not as viewed as a social media post. So
Mm. That's actually a good point that you say that because I recently, so through like the Apple subscriptions or whatever, I have like bundled where like it adds the news, but I don't typically like to watch the news or even hear about the news. Like if it's really important, someone's gonna tell me. Or if I keep up with like whatever politics or voting, those kind like the important things. So I recently in going through like those different notifications, like I was getting notifications for the Olympics, I was getting notifications for like travel and leisure, which is like I guess they have a digital platform, everyone does now. And the other one was like it was like a travel, something else travel related. But I was reading an article and I felt like the article was really short, where like it was just like, oh, here's 10 things that a flight attendant, blah, 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 blah. And then I got the 10 things and there was like nothing else. Like there was no like almost like it felt like there was no meat to the article. I
yeah.
was like, okay, why who is this flight attendant that I'm getting these 10 things from? Like what does it matter? So you're right. Media has changed and not in the way necessarily that when people talk about it, like, oh, the media has changed. It's like, yeah, it's almost like I would probably be more apt to hear something huge on my Instagram, like if I signed in before I were to see it on CNN. First of all, because I don't even watch CNN, but if I did, I'm gonna see it more on Instagram before I see it there. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, it
And you're
it yeah, it's really interesting to see because it's like no one really watches the news anymore, and it's also very generational. Like it depends how you grew up, it depends what age group you're in, but the reality is most people get their news through social media.
mm-hmm.
That's just the truth, you know. And so as a publicist, it's kind of like frustrating because you're constantly fighting that battle of like trying to get a story for your client and whatnot, but it's different.
Okay, so that kind of feeds my next question to you of like how do you stay current in the industry and with trends and things like that. So I guess I kind of want to ask this because I think it's different in every industry. But do you have like a mentor or like a group of people that you work with, or is it just like you, your team, and your supervisor? Like, I don't know how those things work necessarily.
Yeah, so I personally definitely have mentors, people who have impacted me throughout my career. I've stayed really close with a lot of my professors. I see people, I'm the type of person that like if I see you're doing something amazing and inspiring, like I'll reach out and then just make that connection there. And then through work, at least at the company I'm working at, like they implement like a mentor for you from the start. So then on a biweekly basis, you're touching base with your mentor and you go through, um, your workload. You go through things that goals and what you want to perfect and what you can work on and things like that. So I think that's always very helpful because it just gives you the perspective of like someone else who's working with you and who's at a higher role. So
Hmm.
so that in that aspect, I think that's good. But also having your personal mentors is important because at work they're assigning you a mentor. It doesn't necessarily mean you see them as one. So um, I always try and keep a lookout for people who are doing inspiring work so I could reach out and make that connection.
Oh, that's awesome. So I think it's a very important thing to say that it's important to have mentors in general, like people. I think mentorship, a lot of people think that because they're in a position of experience that they can be a mentor, and that's not always the case. Like if you look at an example I can use is, someone who's big in leadership. So like someone like John Maxwell or different books by like Dale Carnegie, you can say, oh, well, he's my mentor. And it's like, sure, like through his writing and through those things, but just because he's in that role doesn't mean you're going to see him as a mentor per se. Maybe you don't agree with their views, or maybe it just doesn't communicate to you the way it might communicate to someone else. So it's very important to have mentors in different, what I say, pockets of life. Um, so you went to school for this industry. You said you got started in 2019, right?
Mhm.
So in the last 5 years, so in the last 5 years, you've learned a lot, I'm sure. And you also have learned in a very unique experience, right? Because of the pandemic. So my question for you is, I'm fresh coming into this same world as you of PR and maybe even some journalism, but specifically PR. What advice would you give me? What would you say, like, you know what, these are the couple of things that I ended up learning through this experience, or I made this mistake or something like that. What advice would you give me?
Yeah. So I think the one advice I always give everyone who's getting started in the industry is do as many internships as possible.
Mm.
Honestly, like that really helped me lay out a good foundation of like my work ethic in this industry, because that essentially those are your starting points, right? And it helps you get more opportunities like fresh out of college. Another something else I would advise is like sometimes you have to take sometimes you got to take an L and like do free work just to build your portfolio.
Mm.
That's something that a lot of people don't tell you, because it's like you'll see people on social media, it's like, yeah, I'm doing this and that, but like they don't showcase how you got there. And I will say I did a lot of free work in the beginning just to build my portfolio, just to network. It's something that you just have to put yourself out there, especially with writing, because it's like, yeah, I went to journalism school, but like, what do I have to show for it? So you do have to build your
Mm.
portfolio and um, do work that isn't necessarily like financially supporting you, but just in the long run helping you. And then third is just, and this is something I'm still working on myself, but don't be afraid to fail, because we're all learning, we're all humans,
Mm.
we're all on this journey. Like there's no so many people, like instead of taking the risk just from being afraid of taking a risk and afraid of failing, like they never make the step and then you end up not doing anything. So I think it's always better to go for it and apologize later versus like never do it.
Right. Kind of like I think the saying is, it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that works out most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time, obviously, be smart in how you do that, but also it does make a lot of sense, and I think it's really impactful for you to say that you have to put yourself out there, because I think people get so, and I'm one of those people, so I'm constantly working on this also, but it's almost like, well, I don't want to do it and then mess it up because whatever, it's a fear of failure, which is normal. Everyone's afraid of failure, but at the same time, failure kills dreams out the gate. So you're like, well, I'm afraid that I'm not going to be good at that, or I'm afraid that I'm going to bomb that. And so they don't go after it and they never pursue whatever it is. And so now they're still at square one. So it's like, if you're going to be at square one either way, you should just go for it, because at least if you try and you fail, then and you probably learn something. If you don't, you still fail and you don't gain any experience. You don't, nothing happens. You're still in the same place regardless. So you might as well at least try, right?
Yep. I tell that to my little sisters. I say that to everyone. I'm like, it's better to try than not because you'll always question yourself and you'll always beat yourself up about it later on, you know? Like, what if I did this? What if I actually took the risk and did this? And so just do it. And I mean, I came from, I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I'm not, I wasn't top in my class, but like, I made it. I
You
never
did.
thought I was never like a great writer in high school. Um, but I put myself forward and I was like, this is a career that seems interesting and I think I could do it. And I did it. So
And look
it's
at you,
still,
yeah. And that's
yeah,
awesome. I think also, so I think about 95% of everything that happens, it happens for a reason. There's like a 5% where like certain things you're like, that didn't need to happen and it just is what it is, whether it's sad, bad, or even sometimes good, where you're like, that wouldn't have made a difference either way. Um, but I think that 95% of things happen for a reason. So you did go to the school that you went to and you spoke to the counselor that you spoke to, and that put you, I mean, you could have spoken to a counselor that had been like, oh, just try harder in business. And you could have been in a completely different world, and maybe even not. You
exactly.
could have a business degree and be working at Target. Not that there's anything wrong with working at Target, but you could be a manager there because you have a business degree instead of doing what you're doing. So it's everything happens the way that it's supposed to 95% of the time.
Absolutely. I believe that 100% too.
So I do want to ask a little bit about Jersey Bites because I personally, I went on the Instagram and I was like, I just need to take a year and run up and down New Jersey and just go eat. Like this looks
Yup.
so cool. So tell me a little bit about kind of the work that you do there and kind of like the exciting things that you run into there.
Yeah, so actually that opportunity, so I'm celebrating 2 years at Jersey Bites. It's been
Oh, that's
a
awesome.
very fun experience. It's a lot of networking just because you have to go out there and like go to the new restaurants and like speak to the chefs and speak to the business owners or whoever's launching or doing hosting like the grand opening and things like that. It's and that the way I landed that was also part of me putting myself out there. It's not a job I
Mm.
applied for. It's not something I saw on LinkedIn. I literally just went on the website and I was like, "Oh, this is cool." And I emailed the editor there because I saw it was a small team, and I just sent her, my resume and my portfolio, and I was like, "Hey, if you're ever looking for, a freelance writer, I'd like you to consider me." And she reached out to me and she was like, "Yeah, here's your first article." And I was like, all right, awesome. And then 2 years later, I'm still there. So,
That's
um,
awesome. See,
yeah,
that's really cool.
yeah. Um, and I was
I
really excited
think,
about it.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say I was excited about it because it's like foodie news, and foodie news is I have the automatic lights. Um,
No problem.
Hold
I
on.
can still see you.
Can you? Okay, perfect. Um, yeah, it's like foodie news, so it's like more fun to cover. When I first started, I was working for Tap into Paterson. I worked for Tap into Jersey City, and then Tap into Hoboken. So I was covering a lot of community events. Um, I had the opportunity to cover the George Floyd protest, which was very
Wow.
meaningful for me at the time. And but it covering those type of stories are just more difficult and more I guess it's more time consuming, right? Because you're actually doing investigative journalism versus going to a restaurant and just being like, I like this. I'm gonna take a picture of this food and I'm gonna give my recommendation and like that's what it is. So I absolutely love writing for Jersey Bites. It's been really really fun going around the state and seeing how diverse the culinary scene is here. Because when
Mm-hmm.
you think food, like I mean, Jersey food culture is crazy. Like There's just so much cuisine out here. There's so much to do. There's food festivals. It's just so much, and it writing for Jersey Bites like kind of exposed me to that. I didn't realize how much there was here in Jersey.
Right, because you did mention you're originally from New York, right?
Yeah, yeah. I came to Jersey when I was in middle school, so
Okay. Yeah, so being born and raised in New Jersey and then now living in Pennsylvania, I mean, I knew this coming here. Like there was no doubt. I was living in Northwest Jersey for the last 6 years before I moved here. And that was about 35 minutes from where I grew up, which is like the Passaic Clifton area, which Passaic alone has, I don't know how many restaurants, but I can tell you they have, I think the only restaurant or the type of food that they didn't have was maybe like Indian food. Um, but there was like in that area, there's Chinese, there was Thai food, there was Spanish food, and like all different types of Spanish food. So Peruvian, Colombian, Dominican, Puerto Rican, like Mexican. Like it was so when I moved to where I was living in Jersey before I moved to Pennsylvania, I I saw a few restaurants come. I saw them like be built there. So like originally it was like two Mexican places, two Chinese places, and everything else was like Applebee's and Chili's. Which nothing wrong with that, but coming from a place where there was like 100 restaurants per block, that was interesting. So now in Pennsylvania, it's like I know that the pizza place down the street is really good. I found a really good Thai restaurant, and everything else is still up in the air. So it is insane to watch New Jersey be like of all the things, there's a lot of food there for sure. So I'm
yes,
glad
there's
that you have something that you do enjoy. I think that's important, right? That's an important part of, to me, it's an important part of life, but also important in what you do for work. So it kind of keeps, I'm assuming it keeps you happy because you really enjoy it.
yes, it does. It keeps me very happy. And like I said, it's exciting. And at the end of the day,
Yeah,
whatever you're doing, like you need to be excited and you need to be happy and you need to be passionate about it. So, um, it like besides all the challenges and everything and like overcoming
of course.
daily, the mundane of it, um, but it's just I can't complain honestly.
Okay. So looking back, in your career, working for the agency, working with Jersey Bites, is there anything that you would have done differently in your career? Um, and that could be, nothing at all, and that would be great. But also maybe it's you would have started sooner, or you would have maybe pursued something a little harder. Like what do you think you would have changed, if anything at all, in your career thus far?
So I think it's interesting that you just had started sooner because I felt so I'm a very organized person. I had a timeline in my head and I was like, at this age, I'm going to do this. At this age, I'm going to do that. And it's like, life throws surprises. So it doesn't
Life
always,
lives.
yeah, life is life. That's it. Life is life. Um, and I ended up graduating a little later just because I was paying for my own college. I didn't get like a major scholarship or anything like that. So it took me a little longer. I was taking like 2 classes per semester, 3 classes per semester. So in my head, I thought I failed my timeline. I was like, I could
Mm,
have finished 2 years earlier or something. But in the grand scheme of things, when I landed my first full time job, I got promoted within the first 3 months. And I feel like that was it's kind of a double edged sword just because one, I was promoted. It was I definitely got imposter syndrome. I was like, I don't deserve this. I
mm,
definitely was not qualified to be a senior account executive like 3 months in. But in doing so, it opened so many doors for me. And it kind of challenged me because with that title comes more responsibility. Therefore, the next place I went to, I was really tested and really put out
Mm.
there. It's something where, like, how most people would have gotten like a year of experience as an account coordinator, another year of experience as an account executive. I went from account executive straight to senior account executive. So it was like, it sped up my process. So in a
Mm-hmm.
way, it helped. In a way, it didn't. But like we established earlier, everything happens for a reason. So I don't think too much about it, but I do recognize that, you know, I could have graduated earlier, but the fact that I was promoted so soon in my career, it kind of just evened it out for me.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I sometimes wish I didn't get promoted that quickly just because it would have given me more time to like learn at a slower pace. But, as I'm kind of a hustler. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make this work. Like you have to fake it till you make it sometimes. So I made it work, and I was just
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm not supposed to be here, but I'm still gonna do it, and that's the mentality I try to keep.
And that's awesome. Good for you. So it's it's funny you say imposter syndrome because shameless plug, I did an episode on imposter syndrome a while back. And I think I'm gonna do like a part two to that episode. And the reason I say that is because people think that imposter syndrome is this like experience that cripples you entirely and you either experience it forever or like it never goes away, like that kind of thing. And you said something really important, and I love to kind of like highlight things like as I'm listening whenever I interview someone, and it's that you were like, yeah, I kind of wish it would have slowed down for me to learn, but like it evened itself out. And it's like, exactly, exactly. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to what you feel imposter syndrome about, because it's because you're uncovering it. It's because you are 100% qualified to be doing what you're supposed to be doing. And it does even itself out. It does, you know, it's definitely a mindset shift. But as soon as you recognize that you are experiencing the imposter syndrome, that's when like you can light the fire. You have the match in your hand because you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And now is your chance to like say, you know what? It might look on the outside like I'm not supposed to be here, but I am 100% supposed to be right here. So, I mean, I think it's amazing also that you were promoted within the first 3 months. Like, I'm sure that your career story, like, as far as resumes, but also just the story itself, it sounds great. I mean, you do what you have to do, and like, you sound like a boss, so you're on the right podcast for sure.
I am. uh, but I think, yeah, like you said, it's just sometimes you just have to trust yourself and trust the process.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So, just to kind of wind down a little bit, what what would you say?
Sorry, I think
What would you say? It's okay. I think the audio kind of gave out. No problem. Um, so what would you say are some common misconceptions in your field?
common misconception.
Like people might think that maybe something's easier than it is, or that it's more difficult. Like I know you mentioned a few times that you have to put yourself out there. So what's a misconception would you say about what you do um that you know for sure isn't true now that you're in this role and you've been here for 5 years and that kind of thing?
The one thing that comes to mind that I've heard across the board is competitiveness. And although that's very true, I think
Mm-hmm.
in the world of PR, there is a very strong community of people supporting each other. You
Mm-hmm.
always come across people who don't want to see you win. That's going to happen no matter what. But I think everyone especially working in like New York, they'll be like, "Oh, it's so competitive, blah blah." It is, and it gives you a little like edge because you know that at the like you're replaceable, you know. But you want to make sure your boss knows or your company knows that although they can replace you, it's not going to be the same, you know. And I think working at different agencies and connecting with people through LinkedIn, I've noticed how supportive other PR professionals are, and how if you do reach out and ask for advice, like people do genuinely connect with you and they'll give you advice and they'll take the time. Like I've a lot of people have reached out to me and just asked for advice, and like I'll answer you. You know, I'm not gonna be mean about it. Like, no, figure it out. I think that's something that a lot of people think or might be afraid to do, like reach out just to ask questions. And that's not the case all the time. So I think that was one misconception because I know a lot of people warned me about it. Like, oh, it's very cutthroat. It is, but not to the extent that people think it is.
Well, that's a very good point because that's kind of how I feel about customer service. So for my day job, um, I've worked in and out of customer service for the last like 15 years. Like I got out of high school, I went to school for business, for international business. I worked at some capacity. I worked in customer service um, since I was in college and then out of college, whatever industry I was in. And people are always like, I could never do customer service. I could never answer phones or um things like it's just so hard or it's so difficult to work with people. And it's like there is hard in every industry, right? And every industry has its like you said, office politics. Every industry has its different things that you deal with. But ultimately realizing that there's support, I think that's I think I wouldn't have known that. Like if we weren't having this conversation, I wouldn't know that there is that kind of network, that there is that kind of support. But it makes sense because who's going to tell you about your industry other than a person who's in it, right? Someone who's been there for a while or has the experience, right?
Exactly. And you'd also be surprised. There's like a lot of networking events which I never
Mm-hmm.
even thought of. But when you are looking for a community, like you'll find that there's little things that you can do. Like there's like a speed networking event that happens in the city every quarter or something, or there's like a PR and women like a group. There's so much that you can honestly look for guidance and just general like networking and making connections with people. And I think that that's something I came into the industry thinking that I wouldn't have, you know? So it was kind of a relief to know that that's not the case.
Well, that's awesome. So give us a little bit of insight if people wanted to follow you or if they wanted to learn more about like Jersey Bites, like where can they find you? Where do you feel comfortable sharing that they could find you?
Yeah, you can go ahead and follow me at my IG. That's I am Alexa Chavarria. There, I share a lot of my career opportunities. I always share like fun little things that I'm doing, and then also like some of my travel. So,
Wow, awesome. So, thank you so much for joining us here today on You the Boss podcast. It was really great speaking and getting to know you.
thank you. Thank you for having me. And I think just a little shout out to you for building this community and doing your thing. You know, like this is a great
Thank
podcast, and
you.
it's definitely impacting a lot of your listeners. So, kudos to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.